In 2014, a team of medical anthropologists from the University of Vienna published a study that changed everything historians thought they knew about the most legendary athletes in human history. They had spent years analyzing bones excavated from a 2,000-year-old mass grave near Ephesus in modern Turkey. The grave contained 67 gladiators who had fought and died in the arenas of the Roman Empire. Using isotopic analysis to measure trace elements in the skeletal remains, the researchers reconstructed what these men had eaten during their lives. The results were so unexpected that they forced a complete revision of the gladiator image that popular culture had constructed for centuries. These warriors, famous for their physical power, their combat skill, and their ability to survive repeated battles to the death, were not eating meat. They were eating barley. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder had documented this in his encyclopedic text, Natural History, nearly 2,000 years ago. He called them hordeari, the barley eaters. The grain that built the most physically dominant athletes in the ancient world is now fed to livestock. Less than 1% of the barley grown in Europe today reaches a human plate. Welcome to nature's lost vault. The archive opens in the Fertile Crescent, approximately 10,000 years ago. Archaeological remains from sites scattered across modern Israel, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq document the moment when human civilization, as we know it, began. Wild barley was one of the very first plants that Neolithic farmers brought into cultivation. Researchers at the Leibniz Institute published findings in 2025 confirming that barley's domestication was not a single event, but a complex process spanning thousands of years across multiple wild populations. The genetic signatures of this ancient partnership are still visible in the chromosomes of barley grown today, but their relationship between humans and barley extends even further back. In 2004, archaeologists excavating a site called Ohala II on the shores of the Sea of Galilee in Israel discovered grinding stones with traces of starch that had been preserved for 23,000 years. The starch came from wild barley. Hunter-gatherers were processing this grain into food more than 10,000 years before agriculture officially began. This was not a random dietary choice. These early humans had identified something in barley that made it worth the considerable effort of grinding tough grain kernels into edible form. That something was fiber. Not just any fiber, but a specific type called beta-glucan that exists in barley at concentrations higher than any other cereal grain on Earth. This soluble polysaccharide is found primarily in the cell walls of barley's endosperm, distributed uniformly throughout the grain kernel. Modern laboratory analysis has measured beta-glucan content in barley ranging from 2.5% to over 11% by weight. Oats, the grain most commonly associated with heart health and fiber content, typically contain between 2 and 7%. Wheat contains less than 1.5%. The difference is not marginal, it is structural. Beta-glucan is a soluble fiber that forms a gel-like substance when it encounters water in the digestive system. This gel slows the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream, reduces the reabsorption of cholesterol, and feeds beneficial bacteria in the gut. The European Food Safety Authority and the United States Food and Drug Administration have both approved health claims for beta-glucan from barley and oats. Consuming 3 grams per day has been scientifically demonstrated to reduce blood cholesterol levels. 1 cup of cooked pearl barley delivers approximately 2.5 grams. The grain that was deemed inferior and relegated to animal feed contains more of the single most health-promoting fiber than any grain that replaced it. The ancient world understood this without modern laboratory equipment. Greek Olympic athletes consumed barley as a primary fuel source for competition. The physician Galen, who served as doctor to Roman gladiators in the 2nd century CE, documented their dietary practices in detail. He noted that gladiators ate primarily barley and beans, a combination that delivered sustained energy and promoted the subcutaneous fat that protected fighters from fatal wounds. The fat layer created by this diet was not a sign of poor conditioning. It was strategic armor. A blade that cut through skin and into a layer of fat would cause bleeding and require stitching, but would not sever the muscles, nerves, or blood vessels beneath. The gladiators survived longer because they ate barley. Archaeological analysis of their bones confirmed elevated calcium levels far above the general population, suggesting they also consumed mineral supplements. These were professional athletes with nutritionists and physicians managing their diet 2,000 years ago. They chose barley. The ludus, or gladiator school, employed cooks, trainers, and medical staff who understood that diet was fundamental to combat performance. The Ludus Magnus in Rome, the largest gladiator training facility in the empire, fed hundreds of fighters simultaneously using this precise nutritional formula. The grain held sacred status across the ancient Mediterranean. In Greece, barley was associated with the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone in the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most important religious ritual in the Hellenic world. Initiates consumed a sacred drink called kykeon, made from barley, water, and pennyroyal. The Romans distributed barley to soldiers as standard military rations. It traveled with legions across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. When Rome needed to punish underperforming military units, the punishment was called decimation and included switching their rations from wheat to barley, which had become associated with lower status. This association was not based on nutritional science. It was based on the simple fact that wheat made better bread. Here is where the conspiracy begins. Wheat contains proteins called gliadins and glutenins that combine when mixed with water to form gluten. Gluten creates the elastic, stretchy dough that traps air bubbles and allows bread to rise into soft, fluffy loaves. Barley contains some gluten-forming proteins, but far less than wheat. Bread made from barley is denser, heavier, and does not rise as dramatically. To the wealthy Romans who could afford wheat, barley bread tasted like poverty. The preference had nothing to do with nutrition and everything to do with texture and status. This preference calcified into permanent agricultural policy over the following 2,000 years. When the Industrial Revolution transformed food production in the 19th century, wheat was positioned to dominate, and barley was positioned to disappear. The invention of roller mills in Switzerland around the 1870s allowed millers to efficiently separate wheat bran from white flour on an industrial scale. These steel machines replaced the stone grinding methods that had been used for millennia. White bread, previously a luxury of the wealthy, became accessible to factory workers across Europe and America. Historical records from Britain document that by the end of the 18th century, workers had firmly rejected the darker breads made from barley and rye. They insisted on eating only white wheat bread, even when meat and vegetables vanished from their tables due to rising prices. The status symbol had become so powerful that people chose white bread over nutritional diversity. The milling industry responded by building infrastructure exclusively around wheat. The consequences were catastrophic and invisible for over a century. When researchers finally began measuring the nutritional content of different grains using modern analytical methods, they discovered that the milling process that made white flour possible also removed most of the vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Iron deficiency anemia, which affects over 1 billion people globally today, has been directly linked to grain-based diets stripped of their original nutrient content. The United States government mandated fortification of white flour with synthetic vitamins in 1941, after military doctors documented widespread nutrient deficiencies in recruits entering World War II. The solution was not to return to whole grains or to diversify beyond wheat. The solution was to strip the nutrients out, add synthetic replacements back in, and continue producing the same white bread that consumers had been conditioned to prefer for generations. Barley was not included in fortification programs because barley was not being fed to humans. It was being fed to pigs, cattle, and brewing companies. Japan took a different path. While Western civilization was abandoning barley as human food, Japanese culture was elevating it to the status of national beverage. Mujika, roasted barley tea, has been consumed in Japan since the Heian period from 794 to 1185 CE, when it was served to aristocracy and samurai as a medicinal drink. The preparation method has remained remarkably consistent for over a millennium. Whole barley grains are dry roasted until they develop a deep golden brown color and a distinctive nutty aroma, then steeped in water. During the Edo period from 1603 to 1868, roadside tea houses called mugiyuya began serving barley tea to travelers seeking relief from summer heat. By the 20th century, mugicha had become the default household beverage across all social classes. Japanese mothers give cooled barley tea to infants and young children instead of water. The drink is served in restaurants alongside meals. Virtually every Japanese refrigerator contains a pitcher of chilled mugicha during summer months. The same grain that Western civilization dismissed as animal feed became the everyday drink of 125 million people in the most health-conscious nation on earth. The health benefits of mujika are not imagined. Research published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that barley tea consumption improved blood fluidity, reducing the risk of blood clots. The roasting process that gives barley tea its distinctive toasty flavor creates compounds called alkyl pyrazines that exhibit anti-inflammatory activity in the digestive system. The tea contains no caffeine because barley is a grain, not a tea plant. It can be consumed by children, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and anyone sensitive to stimulants. It provides electrolyte minerals, including potassium and magnesium, that are lost through perspiration, making it more effective for hydration than plain water during periods of physical activity. Japanese athletes and outdoor workers prefer mujicha over water during summer months for exactly this reason. The Western world spends billions of dollars annually on electrolyte sports drinks filled with synthetic ingredients, while ignoring a beverage that has served the same purpose for over 1,000 years. The modern food industry has almost completely erased barley from human consumption. Global statistics reveal the scale of abandonment. Barley is the fourth most cultivated grain in the world after corn, rice, and wheat. Approximately 140 million metric tons are produced annually. Of that total, less than 1% enters the human food supply in most Western countries. The overwhelming majority goes to animal feed and to malting for beer production. Brewing companies purchase barley specifically for its unique enzymatic properties during the fermentation process, not for human nutrition. The grain that gladiators ate, that Olympic athletes consumed, that Japanese civilization drinks daily, has been reduced to livestock fodder and alcohol production in the societies that claim to be most nutritionally advanced. The conspiracy is not hidden. It operates in plain sight through agricultural subsidies, food industry lobbying, and consumer conditioning that spans generations. Wheat receives more research funding, more infrastructure investment, and more political support than barley in virtually every Western nation. Bakers are trained exclusively in wheat-based techniques. Grocery stores dedicate entire aisles to wheat products, while barley occupies a few bags on a bottom shelf if it appears at all. The USDA food pyramid that shaped American dietary guidelines for decades placed wheat products at the base of recommended consumption. Barley was not mentioned. The message was clear: eat wheat. The grain with the lowest fiber content of any cereal became the foundation of Western diet, while the grain with the highest fiber content was sent to feed animals. Here is what this means for anyone watching right now. Barley remains legal, available, and inexpensive despite decades of systematic neglect. Pearl barley, which has had its tough outer hull removed but retains most of its valuable fiber, costs approximately $2 to $3 per pound at any grocery store. It cooks in 45 minutes to 1 hour and can substitute for rice in virtually any recipe. The nutty, chewy texture pairs exceptionally well with soups, stews, salads, and grain bowls. Hulled barley, which retains the entire grain including the bran layer, requires longer cooking but delivers even higher fiber content. Barley flour can be mixed with wheat flour to increase the fiber content of baked goods without dramatically changing texture. A ratio of 1 part, barley flour to 3 parts. Wheat flour produces bread, muffins, and pancakes that taste familiar but deliver significantly more beta-glucan. Mugicha can be prepared at home with nothing more than roasted barley and water. Asian grocery stores sell packages of barley tea for a few dollars that produce dozens of servings. The preparation is simple. Place a tea bag or a few tablespoons of roasted barley in hot water, steep for several minutes, and serve hot or cold. The flavor is toasty, slightly sweet, and refreshing without any bitterness. Children accept it readily because it contains no stimulants or harsh flavors. Adults appreciate it as an alternative to caffeinated beverages. A single bag of barley tea costs less than a single bottle of commercial sports drink and provides superior hydration with 0 added sugar. The gladiators who dominated Roman arenas for 7 centuries did not choose barley because they lacked alternatives. Their owners invested significant resources in their training, medical care, and nutrition. They chose barley because it worked. The fat layer it produced protected fighters from lethal wounds. Sustained energy it provided fueled hours of combat training under Mediterranean sun. The calcium supplementation they added, documented in their bones, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of athletic nutrition 2,000 years before modern sports science existed. These were professionals operating at the highest level of physical competition their civilization could produce. They ate the grain that modern civilization feeds to pigs. 10,000 years of human partnership with barley produced the gladiators of Rome, the athletes of Greece, and the daily beverage of Japan. 150 years of industrial food production reduced it to animal feed and beer ingredients. The grain with the highest beta-glucan content of any cereal, the grain that lowers cholesterol, stabilizes blood sugar, and supports gut health, sits on bottom shelves while wheat products occupy entire aisles. The conspiracy is not that barley was suppressed. It is that barley was forgotten while inferior grains were promoted. The research exists, the history exists, the grain exists. What does not exist is the marketing budget required to compete with industries built around wheat. Pliny the Elder documented the barley eaters 2,000 years ago. His records survived the fall of Rome, the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. They are still available for anyone willing to read them. The gladiators ate barley. The question remains why modern civilization does not. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every like and share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.